God bless you all. This morning I want to talk about succession promise. You know, in succession, sometimes there is a promise, but sometimes it's just thrust upon us. But Jesus, when he was ready to leave this old world, he gave us a succession promise. Would you like to hear about it this morning? Amen? No? All right, we'll give it a try then. My passage is taken this morning from Romans chapter 11. John 14. I don't know where that Romans 11 came from. Might be a good passage to read, but John 14. I want to ask a few questions this morning. What is the focus of today's church? Have you ever thought about it? Where is the typical church of today putting its focus? How do you see it? Is it about praise and worship? Some people, they say the P&W is great, got to go there. Or is it about blessings and comfort? Man, if you go there, beautiful chairs, and that pastor, when he preached, man, you need to come out of there blessed. Or he gives you a word that you know you're blessed. Is that the church of today? Or is it charisma and style? You know, some guys, they're sharp, boy, silk ties, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. All these things enhance the congregating of saints. But I think what really comes to mind is the church that experiences calm confidence in knowing that their hearts are right before God when they show up. Let's look at one aspect of the kind of church Jesus showed his disciples. To look at the passage, we have to remember that he had just told them about the Comforter, the promise given, that he would pray that the Comforter would come, and the Comforter's role and responsibility was truth. When we find truth, our hearts are comforted. Maybe our lives might be a little bit discomforted, but we can quickly put that aside for the stronger. That is just the weaker. The more lasting is the heart condition that we find comfort in Jesus, rather than the physical intellect that is just for a season. So let's, on the backdrop of that, listen to what Jesus was saying and see if we could find some thoughts that might encourage us. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these will he do, because I go to my Father. And whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. Listen to this one. If you love me, keep my commandments. Father, open up your word to us that we might glean something today that will enable us and strengthen us and encourage us. And the first thing I found when I reviewed it was a church that believes God for more. He said, most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also, and greater works than these. I think the church that Jesus was promising was a church who wanted more. We were not content with what little we learned or what little we experienced. The greater works is a motivational condition that we need to focus on, or we should be focusing on as the Church of Jesus Christ. We're not talking about just going into the community and getting people all excited because you lay hands on the sick and they recover, and you cast out demons, and then your name is big and you publicize it so you can draw people to you. I'm not talking about that. I've seen a lot of that. What I'm talking about is in humility, with a calm confidence that knowing that you can have more, you desire greatly to have more, that you can minister to people in an effective and efficient way, that lives can be transformed from the dull, mundane, poverty-stricken situations to a fuller, richer life that is enabled by the dunamis power of God that fills our lives and our hearts to transform us from the dull, mental, oppressed to the lively servant in the kingdom of God. Not about having a lot of money. I often wonder about that. One man was on his dying bed, so to speak. And the question was asked, how much more money do you need before you're satisfied? And he said, oh, just a little bit more. He was very wealthy, but his concern was just a little bit more. And he was dying and unconcerned about his soul condition. Friends, it doesn't matter how much we have in this life. If we are in tune with God and the work of the Holy Spirit, we simply become custodians. God uses us for the kingdom's work here on earth. I met a friend. He came to Grenada after a while. He used to play little jokes on me. We were in the middle of preparing a mall presence to have church, because the little church that we had was out of the question. And so we were preparing, and this man just showed up because the congregation was tired. He didn't know that, but he just showed up. And I got to know him very well. And he worked until the job was done. And he stayed with us for many years as part of the congregation. Even when we left there and we moved into a new facilities, he was with us still. But this man was financially sound. But his concern was bad water in certain parts of Africa. And he bought pump trucks and well equipment. And he went with it to make sure it was administered, because sometimes people do not really understand how to do the job, and so they try and equipment break down and it didn't get done properly. He stayed until there was good water in several places in Africa. But that was just one of the things he did. He felt God had called him to Peru. And he would tell stories of Peru. And my neighbor, Mrs. Gordon, who was 96 at the time, or something like that, 90-something anyway. She lived to 107, I think it was. She would talk about this young couple that comes to help her to put the garden in the spring. And the young couple showed up. They would leave the mission field and come home because they were coming to help Mrs. Gordon put their garden in. The young couple was over 70 years old each. But when she was 90-something, they're young to her. And I remember one morning coming out of my house, and I had some tomatoes planted. And as I stepped off the landing, going through the back door into the yard, my car was parked in the back lane. The tomato tree was laden down and bending down with nice, juicy, ripe tomatoes. I called Eudine. I said, honey, come and see this. A miracle. Well, when I went to pick the tomatoes, I realized they were tied with little tie straps. It was this man introducing himself to me with a very funny miracle. So I said, I wonder who could have done this. And then one day he came up to the church. He said, did you get the tomatoes that were bearing on your tree? So I knew who he was. His name was Roy Shaw. He wanted more. He was never content with what he had received from God and what he was able to do for the kingdom, because it was a driving force in Roy Shaw to get more done before the return of Jesus. A church that believes God for more, greater works. William Carey, he was an Englishman, very poor. But he just realized that he could get more from God, and he decided that if I must do greater works than these, how must I do it? And he started to pray. And a cobbler, a shoemaker, became his source of income. And away he went to India. He didn't see India as a strange country. He saw India as people who need salvation. And he immersed himself among the people. And the little that was sent to him from the cobbler kept him going. Interestingly enough, this insignificant poor in worldly goods, rich in kingdom desires for more, he left over 700 confirmed converts in India. A university, a school, and then he came back to the United States of America because now everybody was recognizing him and asking him, how can I help? And he started universities, Bible schools, I can't name them all, in the United States of America. And he left the Baptist Missionary Society as his legacy. An ordinary man just like you and I. The desire for more that Jesus offers, the greater works, is not necessarily just raising the dead and healing the sick and doing things to impress people. It's about finding that place where you connect with Him so that you can be the channel through which He can deliver more, greater works. because Jesus knew he was leaving. How would the kingdom of God be manifested in the minds and the hearts of men around the world if he didn't leave this promise that if you desire greater works, you will be able to deliver greater works? And you know what? He also allows those gifts that he gave, which includes the gift of healing. So if that's yours, you'll suddenly see people getting healed. And don't draw attention to it. Leave it with God. And people getting saved because you have the gift of evangelism. And you'd be able to help others to join in with you and do the work of the evangelist, rather than sit in a dull, mundane seat while the power of God is available. Desire more, and the greater works will be manifested to God's glory. Look at verse 13. And whatsoever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. Somebody had to do the greater works, but now somebody has to do the asking. The church that bows the knee to the glory of God creates change. More things are wrought in prayer than this world has ever known, Lord Tennyson. He was some British poet and writer. But somehow he discovered the power of prayer. I don't know the history of Tennyson. I didn't research the history of Tennyson. But I wanted the coined phrase, more things are wrought in prayer than this world has ever known. If we would bow the knee, if we would look to Him, earnestly desiring change. I know that many of you prayed for Sister Williams, and look at what it is. She was sent to have surgery. There was no doubt in the minds of the medical people of Grenada. Even when she arrived in Barbados and they checked her out, she was scheduled to have surgery on Tuesday. But when they review and they recheck before they put the knife on her, go home. If only we would see these things as God's hand at work in our midst and desire greatly to see God's hand at work not only here in Gateway Assembly, but in His church, in His gatherings, wherever 2 or 3 may gather together and He's in the midst, that through the community, people can be delivered from this evil called sickness. We are not responsible when we pray for them. The responsibility falls on Jesus. He says, you do it in my name. You don't go trying to do something for yourself so you get some glory. It's to the glory of God. We don't ask for things so we could show I'm a somebody and I want people to see me. No, we do it for the glory of God. So we have to decrease as He increases. All through my life, I have seen the hand of God working. I'm not telling you something that isn't real. I'm asking you to consider joining that and living that out. Because Jesus promised this while he was establishing his church. He said, this is the promise, the succession planning as the church go forward. You could just look to me for greater things. And when you pray in my name to give God the glory, I will grant it. Why is it so difficult for us? I'll tell you why. Traditions, that's number one. Well, Pastor, that's how it was, that's how it... So why does it have to remain that way? Well, Pastor, why does it have to be... Instead of yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. Yes, Lord, yes, I will trust you and obey. I will bow the knee. You get tired, I know. Sometimes you're just so tired of every day getting up on time to pray. And sometimes you just say, you know what, I have to go, I can't bother with that today. But no! Don't let your intellect be run by the spirit of this world. Let your mind be under control by the Spirit of God and says, I don't care how you feel. You're praying. And you open your heart before God. And sometimes those are the best days when you pray and God moves on you. Sometimes you bathe yourself in tears because you realize how insignificant I really am. And this God of the universe is working, touching my life. Who am I to deserve such a wonderful time in the presence of God? Church, desire more and bow the knee. And that does not make you exempt from having your woes and troubles. There's a demonic force at work. And we still haven't attained perfection. So he knows how to attack us. And James, the brother of Jesus, tells us in chapter 3, I think it's verse 15, I'm not absolute on it, but you could check it out yourself, that our intellect or mind is subject to the demonic. So that's how he attacks us. He works in our mind. He gives us thoughts. I remember Gerald Durstein. He's passed away now, but he was the founder of Gospel Crusade International. That's why I first had my credentials before I went to the Pentecostal assemblies. And he would say, can you see a thought? But you do think, don't you? So can you see a spirit? But they're real, aren't they? And that's how they get into your mind. These spiritual forces send thoughts into your mind to what? To distract you and disturb you and distress you and frustrate you. But when you bow the knee, no matter what those thoughts do, they cannot prevail because you are now to the glory of God Almighty. He's the one, the glory and the lift of our heads. He's the one that will raise us up. He's the one that will set us on the rock that cannot be moved. He's the one that is the strong tower, and the righteous run in and they're safe. So the enemy could only try. And sometimes he brings sickness and depression, tiredness. We're so tired. Then rest. That's who he is. He's a distractor and a destroyer. And that's how he works on us. So when you bow the knee, he has to run in stock because he cannot prevail over the glory of God. The glory of God has already sentenced him. And we don't spend no time binding him and wasting time on him. We just concentrate on the glory of God. The glory of God will prevail to the very end. And when the glory of God ascends on this earth to remove his church, we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of the glorious resurrection when the saints of God will go home. There's a little song that it rings most beautifully in country and western bluegrass style. A little cottage below. Just a little cottage below. But there is streets of gold awaiting. So we have to become a bearer of fruit by sharing the love. Every time I read something like this and I develop a thought like this, I think of Sister Nicholas. One day, years ago, she said this, Pastor, share the love. But it's the truth. It's a coined phrase that we need to embrace wholeheartedly, because just too much self-seeking. We need to share the love. And that's what Jesus was saying. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. His commandments were summed up in two things. Love the Lord your God with all your soul and strength and might. And love your neighbor as yourself. There's the horizontal and the lateral. Love your neighbor as yourself. How good are we? How good have we been at neighborly love? It doesn't take much. I remember years ago, I was working in Toronto in a little church before I took any church at all, after Bible college. And there was a lot of issues and problems in that little church. The pastor used to be quite funny, we'd go for coffee and he'd pull out $5 and say, look how much money I still have. So his objective was like to spend it all out, I guess. And there was a lady that came to preach, and she was preaching about the love of your neighbor and this community, and we need to reach out, in that part of Toronto. It wasn't infrequent to see homeless people. And right in the middle of a sermon, he came in. And the congregation fanned out. It wasn't as wide as this. It's more like this section here, but long. And they fanned out as he walked up the aisle. So I heard the shuffling. I looked back and I see all this fanning out. People moving, jamming up to each other on the pews, So I got up, went to him. Oh my God. The awful smell was intolerable. I literally had to hold my breath and walk him outside. All he wanted was a little milk. So I took what a little money I had. The church used to give me $200 a month. This was in 1995. And all he wanted was milk. But you see, we're not very good at sharing the love with our neighbors. But we have to be careful too sometimes, because some of those neighbors need more prayer than handout. I saw this guy in front of food fair. All he wanted was a cold drink, so I ran and got it for him. And he was holding his pants up because he didn't have no shirt, no nothing. So I went home and I picked out a nice outfit and I searched for him, high, low, high, low. I found him. And I told him, I'll put him on right now because you're as good as naked. Or he's holding his pants, but he wasn't private. He said, no, no, no. Never saw him wearing them. Maybe they could bring a buck instead of a cover a body. So we have to be careful how we minister to certain elements. They're still neighbors. God still loves them. But some of them are under the oppression of the devil. Drug addicts and alcoholics, and the list goes on. They refuse to turn to Jesus. But we need to look at them with love rather than ridicule. And pray as we go by, Lord, have mercy on them. Give us a breakthrough for these. The rubber tree on the hill is covering them. But Lord, maybe you could deliver them. The sugar mill corner, it's like sugar attracting flies sitting there along the wall. But Lord, have mercy on them. Stop and talk to them once in a while. Don't stay too long, because they have nothing much to say, but share a word with them. And in amazement, sometimes you'll see them making a difference. God is still alive and He loves. But here is the problem. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. But some of us don't take time to love ourselves. We beat up on ourselves when we make a mistake. God has already forgiven you, but you're grumpy and pouting and carrying on because how I could do that? And I'm as guilty as anybody else. I'm not trying to say that I'm perfect and you have to follow me. I'm saying, no, follow the Lord and His word. Let it govern your life. Love yourself. And you love your neighbor as you love yourself. So sometimes a kind word brings some joy to your heart. Share a kind word. Sometimes a piece of food will bring satisfaction to your body. Maybe if you could, you share a little food. Love your neighbor. Pray for them. This is the Great Commission. Go ye therefore into all the world and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and teaching them. And that commission is part of the commandment of loving your neighbor as yourself. Do what you can. You can't fix every problem, but sow a seed. Hudson Taylor he founded the Inland China Missions. Today, the Inland China Missions is a massive organization reaching millions of Chinese. But first, to go, he thought he needed to be prepared, and God laid it on his heart to prepare himself in medicine, because lots of Chinese were just left to die. You see, they had no godliness in them. They had no fear of God or no understanding of God. So work, dead. Done. Communism is like that. Work yourself to death so the country will be better. And only those in the higher echelon enjoying the better. Everybody else is just a workforce like ants or like bees. So he prepared himself. And to go to medical school, he scrunched. And he had to eat apples and bread. No money to buy anything. So he could get a little bread and he picked some apples in the orchard here and there and lived on apples and bread. Hardly ever a meal other than apples and bread. His sacrifice was great, but God honored it. Because in China, when yellow fever hit him, he survived. And the science proved that because he didn't have all the fat cells, his body was able to rid it of the yellow fever that killed people. Very, very few survivals. And he worked in inland China missions because he was sharing the love of God. And he came to a conclusion that God's work done God's way, God will always provide. I've lived on that philosophy, and I'll encourage you to try it because it works. When we do what we want and we do the way we want, quite often we run into trouble. But when we do God's work, God's way. So how are we going to know when we're doing God's work God's way? Well, we have the Great Commission, and we have the commandments Jesus left us. Those are wonderful guides to start off with. But if we backtrack in this morning's lesson, we'll realize bowing the knee to the glory of God the Father Almighty. In short, we're asking Him, God, what is it that you would have me do? How would you have me do it? When would you want me to start? Waiting on God on our knees enables us to be a great service in the kingdom of God. We don't mean recognized service, we mean impact service where somebody's life is changed because of the little we did that God gave us to do. Sometimes it seems so insignificant, but it might be life-changing. I went to the hospital. And I went to visit a member of this church, had his daughter in the hospital, and she was suddenly sick. Terrible pain. They put her in the hospital, and I went up right away. After church the Sunday morning, I found out, I went up. Prayed for her, talked with her, understood. A man heard me talking to her and praying for her just a little way down. He said, Pastor, he could hardly speak, Pastor. He told me his name, and he told me where he came from, housing scheme. I said, so you know Brother Williams? He said, yeah, Mr. Pumpkin. I want you to pray for me. I prayed for him. He told me they leave me to dead. The doctor said they can't do no more. And one day I was in Ace Hardware and a man called me out. I said, hi. Don't know who he is from a hole in the ground. He said, Pastor, you don't remember me at all? I said, no, you're embarrassing me. I said, sorry, I don't remember you at all. I am the man you pray for in the hospital that they leave me to dead. You didn't see me now? I said, give God the glory and the praise. I still can't tell you his name, and I still can't tell you what he looked like. I have no idea because I didn't do anything else but pray. But God demonstrated greater works than these, and we give him glory for it. Give him some glory in the house now. Hallelujah. That's the God we serve. And that's the promise in the succession planning of the church. He gave this promise if only we could embrace it. Come and help me close the service and have communion this morning. So I have a question here for you. Does it really matter how wonderful praise and worship is? How wonderful the ambience of the church is? Does it really matter? What does our lesson today teach us as a church of believers? Bow the knee. And bearers of fruit to the glory of God. That's a promise. Desire more. And remember, it's Jesus that promised it. So as you desire more, you ask him not only to give me more, but give me a better understanding of how to apply it to this lost and dying world for the glory of God. We need it. We need it as never before. But the question still lingers. How well are we at assessing this wonderful promise? Never mind, how willing are we to assess, to pursue, to engage? And if we are willing, when must we get started?